All right, it's now 5:02 p.m. on Monday, June 7th, 2021. Now call to order the policy committee meeting of the Belton Independent School Board of Trustees. A quorum is not present. Joining me today is trustee Ms. Janet Lee and trustee Mr. Chris Flohr, along with Dr. Matt Smith, our superintendent, and various members of his administrative staff. Connie, do we have anyone signed up for public comments?
We do not.
All right. So Matt, lead the way.
Let's go. All right. Last time we had a policy committee meeting, we had a guest presentation from TASB via Zoom, and they went over some information for y'all regarding the TASB policy review, what that process might look like. That was presented to you in the board packet, or excuse me, in the policy committee packet again this time. We said we would bring it back this time for any other discussion that you may have. I've also asked Connie to put on your place. We asked for some details on cost and what we pay TASB for, and so Connie made sure that that was in your place as well. And so administrative recommendation is that we would proceed with it. I think it is a reasonable amount of money. I think it's needed, and I think it helps us solidify more role in administrative roles in policy in the school system. And so it'd be something that we would like to pursue. We'd like to talk a little bit about timing with the administrative team on what the right timing would be. But that being said, we want to open it up to y'all for any kind of questions or thoughts that you have.
My first thought was that the mere amount of time that has elapsed between it being done the last time, was it 21 years or something like that? And then a change in administration at least once, if not twice, right? I think the mere fact that that's taken place and numerous legislative sessions since then, I mean, I don't see why it wouldn't be the prudent thing to do.
And I think the hours it's gonna save us if we try to do it ourselves, like, more than covers the cost, so.
Jack, what do you think about that?
I'm in favor of it. Have we, this with other schools, school districts that have used this?
Visited with some in my past life, and in that it was always a positive process, but it's work. I mean, this is a little bit of tedious work, but I think it's an important thing to do. Cost benefit, I think, has always been a positive thing. Also, I did check a little bit into other avenues for doing it. Is TASB the only server in town, or are there others? Mentioned that Holly, I think other legal firms, Holly's included, could do it, but I also think that TASB has a streamlined way to do it. They're the ones who are doing the policy updates. Specifically, they're the ones who also house all our local policies. They have a pretty cost-effective way to do it. So amount of work, cost, I think most people would say it's worthwhile doing it because there's sometimes a leveling out that you have to do between policy and practice.
What do you think about this?
You can't beat this cost.
Right.
I mean, there's, TASB Policy Service, they do an amazing job, especially with the updates after the legislative session. You know, that's gonna change quite a few to begin with. I just don't think you're gonna be able to beat the efficiency and their expertise for this. It's definitely the way to go.
I mean, it's a prudent thing to do, right?
Yes,
Yeah, without question.
right.
Okay.
And it hasn't been done apparently in quite a while, so.
Right.
Okay. I do want to point something out that was brought up in the last meeting too, is during this policy review, they hone in on the local policies, which you all as a board of trustees have control over. It does not mean that we just adopt verbatim what TASB says. TASB will give us their recommendations. We'll have our recommendations. We'll discuss in policy meetings, regular board meetings, and with our legal counsel what is best recommended for Belton ISD moving forward. So I didn't want anybody to just think that we get this, we take what TASB says, we just go and blanket everything and adopt exactly what they say, because the beauty of local policies is that they are designed to meet the local needs of the community that you serve. So I just wanted to make sure I reiterated that.
And we don't always adopt what they recommend either anyway.
No, I think some of them makes a whole lot of sense, but I think others, there's a unique local context that we have to be thoughtful about. I think
It's gonna force us to have a conversation as to why it's different.
That's right.
And does that still apply? And some of them may go away. I don't know how many, but, you know, at least we'll all be on the same page as to why it exists differently.
All right, then, so, procedure-wise, do we need to bring this up for a vote, or, I mean?
We'll move forward in take this to the whole board, make sure that the whole board knows this is not a large expenditure for a school district or anything like that, we can get it moving. But we'll, make sure this is brought up for the whole school board in the upcoming meeting.
Just in a report fashion.
That's right.
Okay, all right. Okay, Matt, next item.
Next item on the agenda is the reviewing of the local board operating procedures. It's my understanding that these operating procedures were developed with Dr. Battershell when Dr. Battershell served as the interim superintendent here. We reviewed them last July, and we did not have a policy committee meeting right before that, I don't believe. We reviewed them as a whole school board and myself. And today I wanted to make sure we brought these back. Holly has reviewed these board operating procedures and made some suggested edits in there, and you see that through some of the strike throughs that you see. I do have a couple of tabs for some questions just to ask you all on if these things are working well for you still, if you have any other ideas on them, and thought we'd open it up for discussion.
Do you wanna discuss, Matt, why don't you tell us what your tabs first, and then I've got some comments about some things and some questions.
Absolutely. If you would take a look at page 4, please, and I think that's the first part that you would see where you see some of Holly's strike throughs and suggested adds. This is about board member response, public participation section of the board meeting. So this is about public comments in our board meetings. There are a couple things in there that I think Holly addressed, and Holly, feel free to jump in anytime you know. I hope you know about your language in there. The question that I had, and this is specifically about policy BED local, but it's also outlined in the board operating procedures, is the length of public comments in 5 minutes being the length of those. This is the first district that I worked in that is given 5 minutes for a public comment. And the other ones, other 4, this is the fifth district I worked in, other 4 districts I think were all 3 minutes that I've been familiar with. So I wanted to make sure we were still comfortable with that and with the, maybe find out what the history was.
I don't know the history, I know we discussed it last year, didn't we, Chris? We discussed the length of time.
We did. I don't think we had a length of time before that either. I think it was such a boundless.
Okay. Yeah. It didn't come up because of the legislative action last time, that's why it came up. You know, based on what we had last time with the public comments, it doesn't take long for it to be a long time, right? It doesn't take, you know, you get 5 people up there for 5 minutes, you know, and it gets a bit tedious, so I'm not opposed to shortening some, although we do have a discretionary provision in there for the president to shorten it. I don't know, I mean, should we go 3 minutes?
3 minutes is pretty customary. Like I said, the board, the chair has the discretion under BED local to change that. One of the things that you could do, you could reduce that to 3 minutes. We talked about this in the TASB Council of School Attorneys, kind of among ourselves, about what we thought the minimum amount of time was. And I think the consensus is that you wouldn't want to give anybody less than a minute. But another thing that you could do is kind of have a sliding scale. If we have more than X number of people signed up, then the board president will reduce the time. If we have 10 people sign up, then the board president will reduce the amount of time per speaker to 3 minutes, or more than 20 to 1 minute, or something like that. I mean, that's another
Which
option.
I think is kind of what we went on this last
did.
time.
It is.
I would be in favor of reducing it standard to 3 minutes and then
Right.
go down from there depending on
Yes.
a mass amount of speakers.
One of the things that concerns me is that if you're in the midst of things, and let's say you've got 10 or 15 people signed up, and then just at the whim to go, wait a minute, we're gonna go from 5 minutes to 3 minutes, you kind of stir things up a little bit, even though we have discretion with that. Public doesn't necessarily look favorable upon that, so I don't think 3 minutes is unreasonable. I agree with Janet, and I agree with you too. Chris, what do you think?
I think people being able to plan their comments is important, right? So knowing that, hey, look, I'm gonna have X amount of time. You know, if I think about an average board meeting, okay, if we get 1 person show up, I mean, that's an anomaly. Normally, I'd say 5 minutes doesn't seem like a lot. I'm not didn't think about 5 versus 3, right? So 3, sort of initially, I'm like, oh geez, that sounds like a pretty big cut, but I don't know.
I don't think it's a big cut if people know going in. And
Right.
like Manuel was saying, I feel like people need to know going in.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be changed. And the policy, whatever our policy is, needs to be clearly written about number of speakers and how time might be limited depending on numbers. So that needs to be on the form.
So if we're gonna do a sliding scale, then I would almost be at 5 at some number, right? I mean, if we keep the scale.
You know, I tend to agree with that. Of course, now I have a couple of notches in my belt, so I have some experience with this process now. So, you know, I think 3 minutes is probably good. Let me ask you something. In the notice that we publish, can we actually add that in there? You know, some language about the meeting, you know?
You could, I don't see that ever published in the notice. What I do see is on the sign-up sheet itself.
I know it's on there.
And then your BED local, we could,
Right.
under your policy to say that, and then your board operating procedures, but you could put it on the notice, I mean, with whatever the instructions are. You know, during COVID, when we allowed people to sign up online, there was a link for, you know, the cutoff time and instructions on how to sign up online, so that would have been a good place to put that in there, but I don't know that we'll continue that, you know, with in-person meetings. So you could even put it at the end where you typically put all of the exceptions under the Open Meetings Act. You could put it down at the end as well, what our numbers, our cutoffs are.
Right.
Well, and it's a good point because people don't have the sign-up sheet before they come to the bike.
That is true.
They only look at the posted meeting notice. That's all they can go on. And so I do think it would be beneficial for the
You know, please
information.
be advised, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. So I think we also touched this, trying to find our page now. I think we touched this on the board page too, right? The board web page.
We do, I believe
Yeah.
we do, yes. And what we could do is we could take a look at policy BED local from other school districts too, and just kind of see and engage in that policy discussion. I just want to make sure as we're going through board operating procedures annually, this is one of those things that shows up in local policy, but also in your board operating procedures. I think it would be beneficial for us to make a good recommendation to you all, and the board can make a good decision on that one. For me, I'm fine with 5, I'm fine with 3, we're good with whatever we need to do. I think encouraging public comments is a positive thing for a school district. I think it's been a rough time, but it's been far more rough in other school districts, and I think we need to remember that as well. It's been a challenging year for not only the school districts, but for the public as well. And so I don't want to do anything that discourages people from coming to share public comment, but I also want to make sure that we use our time wisely. I know our board meetings can get long sometimes, and I don't want to belabor something.
Well, and the vast number of public comments we've ever had in the past have never come close to 3 minutes.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a matter of just trying to use that whole time.
Yeah, so I'm looking at our contacting the board
Mhm.
page right now where we cover this. We probably should link from this other issues section back to wherever we end up putting this, right? Whether it's BED local, whether it's somewhere else, like, so that somebody could reasonably say they could find the limit, right? Just to your point,
Yes.
right? Make sure it's visible.
Yeah, just so they know just how much time I have.
Yeah, because it doesn't say it here.
Okay.
Right. I mean, obviously, in some situations, things are gonna be somewhat emotional. And then when you get told, yeah, you're not gonna talk that long, things can get a little bit more emotional.
Yeah.
Right? So if we give people the notice that they need from the get-go as soon as we can, then I think that would maybe calm that down a little bit. So what are we gonna do, just,
How about this? We'll take a look. I'll do a little digging on other BED locals and we'll see what some other districts around. So there's some local connection to that as well. It's not just based on my experience in other districts. And we'll go from there. And I'll bring it back to you.
okay?
We can always adjust. Again, this it doesn't mean we have to adjust anything at this point. We can always adjust your board operating procedures
Sure.
later on.
Anytime.
Anytime. So, there's not an urgency there, but I'll do a little more homework on that. I just wanted to kind of feel that one out a little bit.
And I'll come up with a kind of a sliding scale, little template we can fit numbers in and some language for including that in here.
Yeah, we may have a starting point for you, so.
Man, do you have a tab further down? Because I had a comment about the same page.
You go right ahead.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And Holly, this is probably a better question for you. When during the course of the recent events, people had brought in things for us to take a look at. And you know how you can publish, well, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know, it was a little bit awkward getting up and then going over there and grabbing it and kind of disseminating it to everybody on the board. Could we have something written in here where it say, well, look, if you have some written materials that you want to share with the board, hand them to
I was thinking the same thing.
this person,
I
and
have
this
that
person brings them up.
We have a designated person that give that.
Yeah, because
Okay.
we had an awkward moment once when someone came up and I think they felt like perhaps we were being rude, but it was kind of obvious, well, do I grab it, do I not grab it, what do we do?
Right.
So
You don't even know what it is at that.
you don't even know what it is. So, if someone wanted to hand it to X person, and that person brings it to the president, and the president disseminates to the rest of us, then the person can start once we have the material in front of us.
Right.
And that could be communications admin, whatever.
I was just gonna say, would that normally be Connie, because most of the forms are turned into you, right, Connie?
We would just add on to that last, what was there?
Yeah.
Right.
that's what I was thinking.
So when they turn in the form for speaking, if there's anything, any handouts, they would submit
If you
those
have
to
any,
Connie.
if you have any materials that you wanna share with the board during your comments, then, and understand that their time's not gonna start until we actually have that information in hand, and then they can begin their comments.
So, the only question I have about this is, I know it may not cost a lot, but does it provide a burden for anybody to present materials? I mean, cost of the copy isn't much, but does that throw up a wall for anybody who might wanna give us something?
I think that's nominal.
And what, a burden on them?
I mean,
Right, so if somebody wants to give something to us but can't afford to provide 8 copies of it,
yeah, I mean,
um,
if they're gonna bring in 250 sheets for us, each one of it, obviously, but we can only look at so much in 3 minutes,
no, I don't.
you know?
We even had a situation like this after our special meeting, where somebody wanted to pass things out, and instead of handing it, to one person who gave it to all of us, they came to each of us. And so, I just feel like it probably needs to be a little bit more streamlined, before or after.
I'm all for straight on it.
But as far as I think people making their own copy, I mean, if they've got something to say, I think the burden is on them, if that's something they're wanting to do personally.
They can email you too, right?
Sure they can.
Yeah, okay, well, there you go.
Do we need to put any kind of clause about if the items that they want to pass out are deemed inappropriate or harmful? Do we need to have a clause like this, that somebody might have judgment? I don't know how you would.
And I wondered, Holly, if you put that bullet in there
Sort of
for
offensive.
that reason, because it said the board, and then one of the suggestions she makes was the board is not allowed to use a video slide or other electronic presentation.
Okay.
So it'd be a written statement only.
Right, the purpose of that is that they don't expect you to allow them access to your LCD projector.
Right.
To be able to, be able to show videos and things like that will slow your meeting down. The other thing that is not in here that we should probably talk about are posters, because that's become an issue in some places with people in the back of the meeting the whole time with posters, and you can prohibit those too. I've seen that in another district's board operating procedures. But in terms of inappropriate materials, I'm trying to think of how, in a context where that might come up. I guess if it's an adult handing you materials, then they could hand you whatever they want to. If it turns out to be something that's criminal, then we can, refer that to law enforcement. But so help me, I'm trying to think through the scenarios of
Something offensive,
Right.
you know, I don't know. Can't think of it specifically, but things are dicey, so,
Yeah. I can think of an example, but it wouldn't be one where we would have a legitimate basis to not take it. You know, like if somebody were to, wanted to show you, this is what's in your sex education curriculum, or this is what's in a book that is on, you know, that's in your library. But if those are things that are purchased with school funds, then, you know, we wouldn't really have a basis for saying that's appropriate for it to be handed to you. Anything else, I think we would just have to.
well, and as long as it goes through, staff first, at least there would be one check. And
Right,
That would
there'd be some
probably be
liability.
mine. I do have another question in just a minute when we get past this one.
But I think that's the most important part, is to have a designated person for people to hand things to. Like when we're in court, you know, we don't just go hand it to the judge. A lot of times you'll hand it to the court reporter or the clerk or somebody who'll take it. That makes sense, makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Quick question on that too, on the same topic is, if we have posters that are of concern, but we also allow posters when we're celebrating, does that create challenging situations for
Yes.
school board? Okay.
It does,
First
because,
Amendment issues?
because then, I mean, your rule has to be content neutral.
Yep.
So if you allow posters for certain things, then just because we don't like the viewpoints of this one particular speaker, we can't decide, well, now we're going to say you can't have them. So if you allow posters, you have to allow posters, but you can tell people if they're obstructing other people's view that they have to take it down. But it's either needs to be an all or nothing on posters, unless it's, you know, profane or.
That's right, I was gonna say, if it's vulgar, profane, or the other one that might come up is the idea if it references a specific individual. Is there anything that, because I think there are some provisions that in those public comments you shouldn't be.
Well, yeah, that's always a slippery slope though,
Okay.
because, you know, you have to, we can, and sometimes we can direct people back to the complaint process, but, you know, that depends on whether that's a concern as well. I mean, you can get into First Amendment issues with that, but drugs or weapons, and profanity, you know, pornography, obviously, anything that's obscene, then we can require people to take down and not have. But if they were just complaining about an individual, I mean, we could direct them to that process, but that's not as clear cut as the other areas.
What about in the verbal public comments about complaining about individuals?
It's the same deal.
Same deal.
Same deal. I mean, you can direct them to, you could say, it sounds like you have a complaint about Coach so-and-so. We're gonna direct you to our complaint, you know, policy under F&G local, and if you wanna talk to the board about that, then you'll have to go through that process. But sometimes people just wanna come speak and have their 5 minutes and be done with it. And the board is not responsible for the defamatory comments of, you know, people in the community who want to come up and speak. They're responsible for the content of their own statements. And so a lot of times I'll see boards want to protect their staff understandably and not let them be berated, especially since things are videoed and posted on the internet. But we do have to be kind of careful about that too. There can be First Amendment issues with that.
Holly, can you maybe elaborate some on orders,
Yes.
conduct? What have you seen in other districts as far as their board operating procedures and what is done to maintain order?
That is
What's unacceptable?
What is unacceptable? I can show you a whole host of videos on YouTube
Right.
of late, and I'll send you a link to some. I just compiled quite a little collection recently for disruptions to board meetings. So in
But it's still the board's meeting,
it's still the board's meeting,
conducted in public.
right? And
Okay, so-
before 2019, we didn't have to allow public comment at all. And that was just a courtesy to the community. That law changed where you now have to allow any,
Right.
you know, person who wants to come address the board about an item on the agenda,
Right.
not items that aren't on the agenda, that's still just a courtesy. But otherwise, you have to allow them to address the board. You can have the reasonable rules like we're talking about here that are in your BED local. That policy also addresses disruption. And the standard TASB policy says that after a warning, if an individual continues to disrupt a meeting, you can call upon law enforcement to have the person removed. It's also an offense under the Texas Penal Code 42.05 to disrupt a meeting with their verbal or physical content. And so we rely on our law enforcement officers to watch and determine when they think something has gotten to the point of being disruptive, and then they will intervene. In my opinion, just clapping and, somebody is speaking in public comment and people in the peanut gallery if they're clapping, in my view, that's not terribly disruptive. If you're able to, they clap for a minute and then you can move on to your next speaker and go on. But I have seen some videos of late in other parts of the country where people will heckle from the back and continue to interject and yell and disrupt, and that's disruptive. That's something I think that law enforcement would become involved with. I've also seen people just walk straight up to the dais, not being recognized, and take over the meeting and tell the board, this is what you're going to consider tonight. Nobody's getting out of here until we talk about this. That's disruptive. I've seen people walk up to the front with posters and just stand up at the front. That can also be a form of, it's a form of protest. And, I'd probably give them like their 3 minutes if they signed up to speak in public comment, and let them do that and then move on with the rest of the meeting. But if it's keeping the board from being able to move on to the next item on the agenda, then it's a disruption.
So public comment does not necessarily mean verbal comments. It can be, I go up in front of the camera and I start holding up posters.
In my opinion, it could be. That's an expression.
Right.
I mean, a moment of silence is expression. So I would give people their 5 minutes or their 3 minutes to do that. Do they get to walk up to the camera? We could say, no, I'm sorry, you need to stay back at the speaker's podium. You want to have a moment of silence where they just, bow their head or hold up a sign or something like that.
Well, I guess the issue is whether we should include some sort of language in here that addresses order, or should we just, law enforcement is always present. So, do we just leave it out?
So
It's in your BED local,
Right,
the
right,
paragraph called
right.
disruption.
Right.
And they're,
I'm talking about, like in a notice or something, where that's included, or, should we even go there?
we could, we could add to this section, we could give, and it's not a bad idea to give your officers, direction.
Right.
Future officers direction on this is how, we expect this to be handled. To the extent, I would just say, let's look at BED local first, the disruption paragraph, and see if
Right.
anything needs to be added to
Yeah,
that.
because the board president needs to be clear as to what the board president can or cannot do when that issue arises.
I think we covered that in the verbal that was given by the president ahead of the public comment.
Yeah,
Like, I think there was something in that, in the read-up.
Yes, there's a
Yeah.
script that
Yeah.
the board president reads.
Yeah.
That talks about people will be courteous and refrain from attacks on, mentioning students and,
Right.
and things
But
like
that's
that.
I'm talking about prior to them coming in and making those, sign up for comments. So they know, the sooner the better. That's the only point I'm trying to make, the sooner the better.
What would happen if we posted, if we had a section on the website, noting Chris's point earlier about, and just detailing some of that information on the website as well? Just because I don't know, truthfully, I don't know in the notice of the meeting, how many people really even read the beginning part of the notice of the meeting, especially when they're fired up about a topic. But if we had it clear as to, on the website regarding the board of trustees, some of your operating procedures about the meeting and some of the, I don't know what to call it, safety issues, but
It's just maintaining order. I like that. Just, the speakers will stay at the speaker's podium. They're, just, speak in a calm, neutral manner, or, I mean,
But we're defining the environment that we're giving them. Like
Yeah.
here's your
Right.
space, you got the time,
Right.
go.
Well, and I think that taking a look at BED local and just reviewing that again, and having a script for the board president to just be able to say, so if there is, as Holly said, heckling that's going on in there, that the board president knows what to do, knows what to say, and put it into it so that the warning takes place. I think we're probably wise.
not to approach the dais, say the speaker's podium, the speakers who are individuals who interrupt, we could put some information in there about what will happen.
But if Holly and I work on a couple of those things together, and if we bring that back, to you all for some consideration coming up. Is that all right?
Good idea. Matt, what was your next tab?
The next tab, a couple of things real quick on, I guess, page 5, board member requests for information. I just wanted to know from your perspective, is there anything we need to add or take away from that? Are y'all still good? Are we functioning okay? If you have a request or a concern or something, are you getting the information that you need?
And I'll flip it back on you, are we asking you the right way?
I think
Are
so.
we breaking the rules?
I feel like that, so here's my take on board operating procedures and doing this annually, is it's my job to ask the question, hey, are we all still getting the right info? Are we still working together in the right manner? I believe so on this one. I think whenever a board member has a question, if it's something that is answerable right away, we try to get a good answer. If it's something we need to think about, we try to make sure that y'all get the information in a whole manner.
I think sometimes I still struggle a little bit with if I have a question that's not necessarily pressing, but I do not want to interrupt your day for one little thing,
Yeah.
Would you prefer I text you or somebody else?
No, I
That's the
definitely
thing.
prefer
I
it
don't
coming
know.
from me. Yeah, I think the interesting thing on that type of a situation is, if it's, I would prefer it comes to me, because what I'll do is I'll dish it out to the appropriate administrators to follow up on if that's the case. When if we go a different way and you contact the other administrators first, sometimes what that does is it gets to be a feeling that person needs to respond right away because you're a board member. And I want to really protect against that a little bit, because some questions you should ask that aren't something that we have to act on right away, but we should be able to get some information to you all. So I think I would still like those to come my way so I can distribute them and follow up.
Yeah, and you should feel the same way, that if we were to text you in the middle of the day, it's just we're just finding a time that we can ask. It doesn't necessarily mean we need an answer right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so,
I have some of that same, I said, should I text him or not? Like, I just got text, this is Mickey Mouse stuff, man, I got stuff to do over here. And I've talked to other administrators too, and I've told everybody, look, if I send you a text, if I need something now, I'll say that, otherwise, put me at the end of the day, whatever, next day, it doesn't matter to me.
The kind of the way we work with our administrative team is if you all as board members contact them, the expectation is they just tell me that you contacted them if you haven't asked. And so that I know what's going on for them. And flip side of that, if you have something that's coming to me that I distribute to them, my commitment to them is that I give them that info as well. So I think it's working fine right now. I want to continue it, but I think posing this question every year to clarify the board superintendent's communication process, I think is important for us. But I don't ever feel, I'll put it this way, I have never felt like any of you say, emergency, call me right away. And I usually act on that. Sometimes I'll respond to you right away, and other times it might be a few hours later.
Right.
But I've never felt like that was abused in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I don't ever want to feel like any of the administrative team that I'm pestering them, that's the last thing I want to do. It's this guy won again. I don't want to have anyone have that kind of feeling.
Well, and I
Is that what
think
you're doing, Chris?
I'm pretty sure that's the reaction. No.
I promise what I would say is that I think the one thing we might want to consider is the last two bullets on page 5, I think are a little confusing when you read them. And you said board members shall make formal information requests directly to the superintendent. Superintendent may direct other administrators to respond. Second bullet, board members can email or call the superintendent or executive staff to ask questions or request information. And I think in the superintendent's contract, it says that all requests for information or problems or concerns come to the superintendent. So I think my point in bringing this up is we talk about it every year. If it's not working for one of us, we make the adjustments needed. I am not saying it's not working from an administrative lens. If y'all would like to do anything different, that would be
Yeah,
good.
those two are a bit inconsistent.
Bit.
I mean, just give you an example, if Mike presents something and then, you know, we've gotta do a report to the board.
Right.
I might call Mike, hey, Mike, you know, I don't remember what you said last time, can you
Right.
tell me? Alright, so I don't see any reason to call you about it, cause
And you know, if you call me, I'll be like,
call
I think
Mike.
you better talk to Mike on that one because I can't answer that.
Yeah,
And so I don't have any issues with those things at all. I think if it gets to a complaint, and Mike lets me know when you all call him and say, hey, I talked to Manuel today, here's what we talked about, just so that there's constant communication. So
I mean, if you think we need, I mean, it's a bit of a redundancy there, you know.
Well, what if on the second one, we said, at the end, board members can email or call the superintendent or executive staff to ask questions or make informal requests for information?
Right.
Because the top one is formal information request.
Yeah. Like copies of documents or something for the first one, and the second one is just,
Or we could just take out or executive staff on the second one.
I think for me, here's the biggest thing is I trust this team, and I trust you all, and I think the communication has been good. I'm not worried about it at all.
but we
I
can
think-
make it clearer if you want.
Well, and I think if there's a complaint, that's when I really want to know. If you as a board member have something that's going on about a school, about a situation at a school, about something that's going on, that's when I definitely should be the one that's notified.
Yeah.
But if it's, and, you know, Deanna mentioned something in this presentation, I want to follow up with her. I don't need to be in the middle of that, and our admin team tells me.
EIC local, so, yeah.
I'll take all your calls.
And then my only ask is if one of us ever does anything that isn't in line with this, that, like, we just, if somebody's back in.
Absolutely.
Get over here, Chris.
I will say, I truly do mean that, because generally I try to copy Matt, anytime I send an email, I send it to Matt, and I might copy the person that's ready to. And so if that ever gets in the way, I'll stop. So, and I will completely, yeah, so just let me know.
I promise you. I will.
Tell him
What
that.
do we want to do?
So
Is
we'll
there
take,
anything y'all would like to add or subtract on that one?
No, I mean, if you think it is a bit redundant, so,
If it makes it consistent, change it.
yeah.
Holly, will you take a look at that second bullet, the first and, or, it's not first and second bullet, the last two bullets on page 5,
Mhm.
and just see if there's any other way you'd like to recommend we word those.
I think on the second bullet, I mean, we either just need to take out or executive staff and have everything go through the superintendent, or we need to clarify that those are for informal.
Well, I think, just like the example I gave, you know, like Jennifer talks to us about financial stuff, I mean, sometimes just wanna call her and ask her a question. So, if we make it that way, then we're not gonna be able to do that, then we're violating our own policy and procedure.
I think that if we put in, I like the words informal requests, because I think I want our administrative staff and our board of trustees to feel comfortable in communication with each other on any of those issues, and I don't see the need being involved.
Okay. Janet, what do you think about that? You okay with that? Any additional tabs?
I got like 17 more notes. I do have a couple more. Same thing on, excuse me, Holly had some strike through information on closed meeting stuff. Page 6, there wasn't a big change, just some capitalization and stuff. Page 7 on their meeting minutes. One of the things that struck me on this one is that I think we have increased this, the number of meetings that we have because of our policy committee meetings and our facilities committee meetings. pretty drastically on that. And I think we talked a little bit about this, like, should we get those every month on a,
Yeah, so my concern on that was, like, in our regular meetings, where if we treat this as the first reading, the minutes of the meeting where we're addressing that, like, don't include the first read, like our first reading, right? Like, it was a meeting behind, and so it feels weird if this is our first reading, and then we're acting on it in the meeting, then we don't have those minutes in the meeting, right? Yeah.
and for me on that one, I guess I hadn't thought about it, that I remember that one, I remember this was.
We weren't doing the minutes, like our meeting in June, for example, we'll have the minutes for, it won't be
The
June.
May policy
May,
meeting.
that's right.
Yeah, but we may be addressing something in the June meeting,
Right.
where the first reading was the June policy committee.
But I thought when we started these meetings that we did have the minutes, like we have this and we had the minutes, didn't we, Connie?
Well,
Have we always lagged a month behind?
Yes,
I
but
didn't
in the
think we
olden
did.
days, you had the first reading was at a regular board meeting, so those minutes
Right.
were in the second reading
Right.
meeting. Now,
Right.
like Chris just said, this meeting's happening today, so these minutes would need to be done by next week to go in the packet for
Right.
the meeting. in
I thought
June.
that's what, initially it was happening that way when we started the committee meetings.
Probably not,
No?
because my deal has always been, I'm working on last month's meeting minutes. I had like
Right.
6 or 7 sets to do for this packet coming
I
up.
see.
And so I'm
Right.
still
Pretty close
finishing
to that.
those, and
Well, yeah, I don't understand the burden that goes with it, but it just feels wonky if that's our first reading.
But I also wonder if in our, so if we're doing, and this is a good example, we have CB local on our agenda today, and it's gonna be a first reading.
Right.
We won't have the minutes ready for this meeting for when we publish the board agenda next week. But we'll have already talked about CB local at that time with you as a policy committee, so I think some of it is how much you're comfortable with as a policy committee, because we do have a video record that we post online.
Right.
And we also have you all as being involved in the discussion. I don't know if it's super important to have that in the.
Right, and I always
minutes.
tell the rest of the board members, look at page such and such.
Right.
You know, they have an opportunity to look at it beforehand and then not point it out at the meeting.
So I think
I
that's.
mean, it is a bit odd to have it that way, yeah.
I mean, the full information's in the packet, right? So all of us should be going through the full packet and looking at what's on the agenda. Anyway, just instructing is funny.
Yeah,
We'll keep taking a look at that one. I just wanna make sure I brought that up because I remember we had a question on that. Next page on 8, communication, so informing you all of when we have events or items that are happening in our school district, and making sure you all are stay abreast of those things. Are you getting the information in a timely manner enough, or is there anything that you'd like to change for that?
I don't know if there's ever a way for us to get our report packet before Friday, but that,
That would
if
be
we could
good.
ever find a way, that would probably be best.
Friday, yeah, Saturday, Sunday, Monday comes around pretty quick.
300 pages
Yeah.
shoots a weekend fast.
Like
well,
Sunday
you
afternoon.
know, the thing that happens to me is, if I'm really busy Friday, and I'm wore out Friday evening, I ain't gonna look at it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just not going to,
It's
and then
definitely not
I
ever
find
gonna happen
myself
on
Sunday
Friday.
night, I'm going, oh man, I gotta get through this, and then I'm in the Monday morning, I'm at the office, and then I got questions, and I think, well, it's too late to ask questions. But, you know, it's worked out so far, so.
We can keep taking a look at our procedures internally and some of that.
Well, I wanna increase the burden on the staff, you know, I wanna do that, right, Connie?
Well, and sometimes with the board
Working
bulletin.
together, they're the ones that will,
Yeah.
Well, and the board bulletin has got very important links now. I mean, like this last one, we even had to fill out a survey and all of that kind of thing, and it's important, very important things.
Yeah.
And that comes, and the board packet comes, you know, it's worth not this week, but
Yeah.
often those types of things all come at the same time, and you got 2 days. So,
To me, it's only an issue if it's a huge amount of information. But
A
typically,
lot of our
it's not.
markets are pretty huge, so I understand that, and I think there's things that we can continue to do and revise internally, we can keep asking this question, are you getting the right information at the right time as a board? Again, we've said all year long, we wanna make sure you're getting the right information to govern the school district well. And if we're giving it to you too late, like even in an emergency situation, when I notify you all that, hey, here's the situation that's happening, we had a bus accident, whatever it may be, trying to give that if you're getting that stuff too late, that is creating problems with you all, then we need to know those things, so.
Yeah, but, I mean, administrators do a great job of presenting things to us at the meetings, you know, so, some of that financial stuff, you know, I'm not too good at it, but I'm getting better.
It's a lot of stuff in there.
There's a lot of stuff, you know, I mean, that's why we have staff.
Last thing that I had a question on was citizen requested complaints. And I think you all know that one, but I wanna make sure that was still working well. I think we already kind of covered that, and that was all I had.
I mean, we need to make the same links here, like we talked about for the website, right? Just tie all that up and put it together.
Okay, and this is separate apart from public comments. Request for.
Correct.
Okay. Because sometimes when people make public comments, they also request information or have something that does need to be followed up on. And I think as a board member, I'm not always clear if we're doing that. I know we came up with a form or a letter that we send people, but I don't know what's the step after that. If the person really had a valid point and, or they do need information, I don't think we then hear what the follow-up is. And I think I need to close that on some of our people who have made comments. I need the follow-up.
Along the same lines, if someone sends me an email, and I'll forward it to Matt. I mean, that'd be a good idea, I guess, to find out what happened to that, and how did we respond to that?
Yeah, I think we've started with the form letters of thanking people and trying to make sure that the appropriate administrators are responding. To give you an example, when I get emails into my email box, we try to make sure within 24 hours, somebody gets an email back that says the appropriate administrator is gonna respond back to you, we assign it to the appropriate staff and they follow up. But we don't always come back and say, here's what we followed up on. And I don't know if all the time that would be appropriate, but I think sometimes definitely.
Well, I think when it comes to us,
Yeah.
so if we got an email, we got a letter, or we got a public comment, and that came to the board,
Yeah.
then the board is gonna need to know the answer to that question, if there was a question or concern. If it's just something that comes to you guys, we don't necessarily need to know all that. Y'all agree with that?
I understand, I mean, if somebody sends me an email, and then they expect some sort of response, then I don't want them to send me another email and say, why'd you ignore me?
Well, let us play with that one a little bit, we'll think about how we address that. We've been trying to do some of that in the follow-up, like if there's a question that comes up from a board member says, well, this question was brought to me by a member of the community, we try to make sure that we do the follow-up in board bulletins, and also everybody knows those things, but on some of the public comments, I hadn't really thought about that part, so. Great, thank you for going through that, I appreciate it. Holly, was there anything else that you think we should discuss?
No, I thought your board operating procedures were in really good shape to begin with. I have a rather impressive collection of board operating procedures from districts around the state, if you're interested. But my approach to this was kind of like, if it's not broken, we don't need to try to fix things that aren't broken. But if you would like access to that, I can send you a link to a folder with a bunch of stuff in it, and you can peruse those at your leisure. But I think they're in
Put
great
Chris on
shape.
I just want them to be clear. I
Right.
mean, if they're clear, if you think they're clear,
Yes,
unambiguous, then I'm good with that.
they're clear to me, but I'm a little bit biased. I mean, I read this stuff all the time.
Right, but you
so-
read other
Right.
stuff from other
Right.
districts, yeah.
Right, and I thought they were good, and,
I did have one question. Matt, on the evaluation of the superintendent on page 7,
Yes, sir.
we have the annual evaluation of the superintendent, and then this is the modification. And review of the superintendent's contract will typically be done in January. if a superintendent's on a 3-year contract, then why do we need to why do we even need to say that, and then we're gonna review it? I mean, we're not gonna review it every year. I mean, is that something? We have to do the evaluation every year, but do we have to review the contract every year?
You don't have to review the contract every year.
Right,
Or we haven't historically.
Right.
right.
And that was my change in the language, because it also said contract renewal is in January, which made it sound like that's a
Every year,
given
every year.
every January, which you don't have to do. But I think in January, when you do the evaluation, that would be the logical time to stop and look and see if you wanna make any changes to the superintendent's contract. So I think just a review of it doesn't require you to take any action, but
Okay.
just for planning purposes, to let people know, if you are gonna do anything about it, January is usually.
When do we have to, as far as the evaluation legally, not the local, but legally, when do we have to do the evaluation?
Just once every 15 months.
Okay. Okay. And then,
What's the history behind January? I've always thought that was a little wonky.
It's because traditionally we did teacher contracts in March, administrators in February, and superintendent in January. And it would just kind of, I guess, flow downhill starting in January. But I'm not sure why that has the history that it does. I don't think it's based in statute. I just think that's, they started looking at the top in January and went from there.
seems more logical to do it at the end of the year, to me anyway.
So
You're the only
would you
person
want
on
it
the ball. Say again?
No, I think January's fine with me. It's always a little interesting that when you talk about evaluation, and most of our goals are based on a school year
Right.
goals. That being said, hopefully this never ends up happening, but when the superintendent is looking for a job, usually it's between January and June that they're looking for that job, so there's a little bit of some of that might revolve around that situation too. That
Makes sense. And there might have been an old commissioner's rule on the superintendent evaluation process that had some timeline. I don't recall that, but it's possible.
I think for me, the important piece would be is that we have the ability to talk about the evaluation and the contract on an annual basis. Not that it has to be done, but that we have the ability to do so.
Anything else?
That's all I've got on those.
I did have one other item on the selection of board officers. I know that came up here recently. You guys feel that we need to make any changes to that? Page 7.
The only thing that I think could potentially be beneficial is adding something about when terms begin. Or if an officer fills an unexpired term, that counts as a term. And terms begin in May. Something. Thoughts?
Should we say that, steal Holly's language, typically terms begin in May? Chris, I see you thinking. What are you thinking?
Alright, I mean, I almost feel like we could do this whenever we want anyway, so what's the difference?
Right.
I mean, I know where you're coming from, right? I mean, the clearer you can make it, the better, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to me right now.
The policy regarding reorganization of the board, isn't it a local policy, Holly, is that right?
Right, well, and part of it's legal, the board has to reorganize after,
Annual.
at the first meeting after an election.
Right.
But there are some boards that will say, well, they agree to not make a decision at that meeting, they postpone their board officer election until later, but they do have to stop and talk about it at that first meeting after the board
Well,
elections.
technically, the first meeting after the election is the canvassing of the
Well, yeah,
votes.
right, but the
So
first,
does
full-
that count?
that doesn't count.
Because council reorganizes at the canvassing of the vote.
Well, it could count, right, certainly. But I think most school districts, because we can have a quorum of just two at a canvassing meeting. So most districts just do it at the next full board meeting.
That's how it works.
Is there any requirement, I assume, to have the new officers sworn in? Is that why most of them do it as well? Because you wouldn't necessarily swear in new officers at the canvassing. Or the new board members,
Right.
excuse me, at the canvassing election.
Usually canvassing is just canvassing,
Yeah.
in my experience.
The only reason I brought that up about reorganization and policy, because it all depends on when our local elections are, because some have them in November, some have them in.
Right.
Just leave it as is for now.
Well, I mean, to Chris's point, that we still have discretion. And we did it last time that way to address things that were extenuating. Chris, anything else about that? I mean, it worked out. We can always revisit that.
I mean, when I read it, I'm like, okay, great, you become the whatever officer, you plan on being there for a year. I mean, it's what I read it, it's a 1-year term, starting
The
there.
tricky part
Yeah, tricky part, I guess,
is when
somebody's been wet.
you fill an unexpired term as part of your 3 years.
I wouldn't be opposed to clarifying it if clarifying it helps, but I'm not passionate about it.
I can come up with some language for that, we can look at.
Sure. Give us an
I mean, I
option.
see your point. I mean, it's, you know, because,
Well, it did cause a little confusion.
yeah, because, I mean, if you're appointed in the middle of something, and you're not gonna serve a 1-year, your 1-year term is gonna cause a problem, because it's always gonna be oddball.
Which would throw the next person off.
Right,
And the next person.
that's right.
What we can do, we do not have a policy committee in July, but we do have one in August, so we can plan on bringing this information back in August for the policy committee before we bring it to whole board, because I want, some of these things I want you all to be able to look over as a policy committee first.
Right.
There's some of those things, it depends on how it reads and feels to you all, because this is about the.
That's good, then
interim
we can adopt them before the school year starts.
Very good.
Janet, anything else that you saw in there, Chris?
No,
All right, Matt, next item.
CB Local, State and Federal Revenue Resources, Ms. Land is going to give us a little background on this. A lot of this is due to a lot of interesting times right now and ESSER funds and all sorts of stuff, so I'll let Jennifer take it away.
Yes, thank you for having me here tonight. I am here to help or to present the first reading of the changes to CB Local. And CB Local, the change has been brought about because TEA notified us of our eligibility for our ESSER 3 funds, and those ESSER 3 funds are granted to school districts to help respond to the pandemic and address any learning recovery that may be necessary because of the COVID-19 pandemic. TEA published some guidance, and with that guidance, they have requirements that we must adhere to in order to get the ESSER 3 funding. One of the recommendations that TEA presented to districts is that districts develop a policy for to address how we will provide the required public notice regarding those funds, and in order to make the public notice that goes out to our community consistent. So that's why you will see in policy CB Local at the end, we have added some recommended language from TASB. And what this language does is say that we will have our public hearing, or that we will have information presented at a board meeting regarding the uses or the way that we want to expend our federal funds. And we also have to publish that information on our website at the same time. And we have to also clarify that we want, or the opportunities that are available for public input. And in this policy, we say that the approval of the grant and the award plans are to be by the superintendent or designee.
Are you gonna be coming and talking to the rest of the board about this, or is this something that we wanna do now as a first reading, right?
So this would be a first reading today, we would bring it to the whole board at the next meeting coming up. And I think there are a couple of options, and Holly, you might be able to help us with this too. School districts were presented with options, so we have some interesting deadlines because of ESSER funds that applications are due. And I think it was Tasby that provided some suggested wording for a resolution that would happen for school districts. And in that resolution, it would basically set aside policy CB local because we wouldn't be in compliance with policy CB local. What we discussed was we have the opportunity, if we need to adjust policy CB local long term, we have the opportunity to do so in the policy committee meeting and then at the regular board meeting. So we're not doing a resolution to set aside I should never use the word violate, but to not follow your local policy. So that's why we're bringing it to you like this today.
And I guess there's some sense of urgency with getting this. You want to make sure that you have this policy language in place because they're about to release funds and you're going to have to come up with a plan on how you're going to spend all of that. And so Tasby came up with a draft resolution that a lot of boards have already passed. But we thought we had time to, and that resolution says basically we're going to deviate from, or by this resolution we're amending your CB local. And so our thinking was we'll just amend the policy and not have to do the resolution.
What would public comment be? I mean, what would be the purpose of that? I mean, if TEA's already told us this is the roadmap to recovery, then why do we need public comment on that?
We have to allow the public an opportunity to provide any input, and that's one of the requirements, just to show the public that we have a plan in place for the way we want to expend those federal dollars.
So is there a lot of discretion in that, or have they given us a roadmap that we have to follow? In other words, this is what you're gonna spend the money on, that kind of thing.
We have some flexibility in how we spend it, but there are allowable cost categories. So we don't, we can allocate dollars within those allowable cost categories. That's the flexibility.
Okay. I see. So if you wanna spend more on one category than some other district, you can do that,
Yes.
Absolutely.
but you have to cover all these categories.
We have to
Whatever categories that they outline.
we have to make sure that our costs that we are proposing fall into those categories. Not necessarily do we have to touch each category, but we just have to make sure that the items that we want to spend the dollars on are in fact allowable for the grant guidelines.
Understood.
Seems pretty straightforward, what am I missing?
No.
Yeah, I mean,
But with this policy revision, that means that it's not only for ESSER three, it's moving forward for all of our federal grant awards. And I'll check with Tasby regarding the structure of the changes to CB local. Make sure we have it in the right place.
Personally, I don't think it hurts. It's another level of transparency with the public to be able to say, every year we bring to you our federal grants and we're gonna present initial plans for those. If you have comment or feedback on those, here's the opportunity to do so. It's another level of transparency. Great, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
And the next one is our student handbook overview. So we spent quite a bit of time discussing this one last year. And Mike's going to talk to us a little bit about that. Remember, student handbook and student code of conduct are two different things. Student handbook is something that the administration develops for guidance for the parents and students in the system. Student code of conduct is stuff that's approved by the board of trustees, and sometimes those are talked about in the same manner. So Today, we're really gonna talk about some student handbook things and go from there.
Nice to see y'all again, and it doesn't seem like it's been a year already, huh? Since the last time we talked about handbook. So we do want to give an update today. Obviously, there are some elements and aspects of the handbook that are outside of our control, and there's some things within our control. And I want to kind of give you a refresher or kind of reintroduce some of the changes we made last year, particularly with some expectations on student dress code and IDs, and then kind of give you some feedback on how that's gone and kind of some recommendations moving forward, and then talk to you about some next steps. So as you look at process, we started last year's conversation with process. Next slide, please. And we'll move on to kind of the process that we use this year, which was, it had some similarities but some differences as well. So this year last year we started with committees and subcommittees to get to the point of what areas do we really need to look at? Where do we feel like we could refresh things on campus and have opportunities to make positive change for students and staff? And so this year we kind of refocused that on, let's take the things we looked at last year and let's collect feedback on the effect of those changes and see were they positive, were they negative, where do we need to go on from here? So we spent, and I say we, a lot of this work was spearheaded by Cynthia Bodie. Some of it was spearheaded by campus administrators. We used opportunities of our principal leadership learning, of our AP leadership learning, and we also took an opportunity to survey staff and students as well to get their feedback. And we also had, as we had the folks in person, we also did hot dog activities and Google surveys, and I'll kind of go into those surveys a little bit deeper in the presentation tonight. There are different departments that have roles in the handbook process each year, and we do rely on those departments for updates, not only on procedure and department changes, but also on legal and legislative changes that may impact them as well. So we do have elements of teaching and learning and their feedback on the handbook process of our technology department, health services, our student services department, and our career and technology department. All of those have different aspects and elements in the handbook that are specific to their programs and to their departments. We base a lot of the format and the legal side of our handbook and code of conduct, even though they are separate documents, based on TASB model handbooks and TASB updates. This is a legislative year, so we are watching closely to make sure if there are legislative changes that are going to make significant impacts on our handbook, that we follow those as well. And then any BISD changes are incorporated in the new handbook based on feedback from our different feedback loops and feedback from you guys and from our board of trustees and from our community as a whole as well. Next slide, please. So there were some dress code discussions that we had last year, and I brought basically the same document back just as a refresher. That we did have student dress standards, and we also had things that students may not wear. And really, we settled on, and then you guys gave us some valuable feedback in this process last year. We settled on 3 items or 3 changes to the student dress code of conduct last year, and that was being less restrictive on allowing tights, leggings, and spandex that can be worn. On facial piercing, there was a limit to one facial piercing, and then finally on what students may not wear, was talking about hats and caps. And so I will give you some feedback in a second and hopefully get some dialogue and some input from you guys on what y'all are hearing about those changes as well. Next slide, please. And then probably the one that was I'll say the most significant change was it's kind of reversing course a little bit on what our ID expectations were. And so the revision that came forward last year for our 2021 handbook is that secondary students would be issued an ID card, that they would be expected to carry that card at all times, but would only have to produce that card on demand if asked by a staff member to show that. I've been around campuses, I've talked to staff. I think a lot of students still wore their ID the majority of the time, some did not. I do want to make a couple of points, and I think this is where our discussion needs to go and where our work lies ahead in this, is that the object of this was, the positive that was expected from this change is to allow staff to focus in on relationships with kids instead of constantly asking kids for their IDs. Where's your ID? Where's your ID? The goal of this, or the purpose of this, was not to devalue IDs. So I think that we have to look at 1 year in, have we done the work to make certain that we have not devalued IDs by not putting the opus on campus staff that students have to have them on at all times, and if they don't, then there's consequences. And I think there's by kind of talking this through with other staff members and campus leaders and even students and teachers to an extent, you know, we have to make sure that there is some incentive and there is some value in wearing the ID. So, for instance, every cafeteria that we have in Belton ISD now has a barcode reader, and some of that kind of came as a necessity for us to try to go to hands-free dining during COVID. But there's no campus now where we can't say for you to receive your lunch, you have to have your ID. We're going to scan it. That barcode's going to go to your account, and you're going to move on and eat. And I know some campuses even impose if you didn't have your ID, you had to go to the back of the line. And that was kind of the way that we incentivized ID wearing in those situations. We also have barcode readers in every situation where technology has to be checked out, every situation where a library book or resources have to be checked out. In all of our attendance clerks' offices, they have barcode readers where we can quickly scan kids in and out if they leave for the day or come in late. I know that we still require IDs, especially with some of our high schools. IDs can get you into certain events and certain contests or performances. And then we have to have an ID of sorts in our smart tag that signs you in and out of your bus every day. So I can name at least 5 opportunities every day where a student should have to use their ID to access students at district services. So I think the work that needs to move forward on that is we need to find more ways to strengthen the value of the ID and not say, because I did hear it, I heard it, I even heard it from a board member, well, kids don't have to have IDs anymore. And I want to make sure that we continue to send the message that that's not the case, that kids don't have to have IDs. We're just not going to spend energy. I'm a teacher, you're my student, you've been in my classroom for 97 straight days. I know you, you know me. Do I need to stop and ask you for your ID as you come into my classroom that day? That's kind of where I had to wrap my head around this from the administrative standpoint and recommendation from campus administrators and from teachers. And I'm gonna be honest with you, when we go through feedback, the feedback's mixed. You know, we don't have 100% saying this is the greatest, some of these are the greatest ideas we've ever had. But I do think we can break it down to where some of the concerns still are, and I think that's the work for us to have with our campus teams is how can we move that work forward where more people feel good about this. And I think for IDs, it has to be, we have to make sure that the IDs become more valuable, not less valuable, regardless of whether the expectation is to have them on at all times or they produce them on demand. So I guess I would stop before we get into the feedback, and I would just ask you guys thoughts on kind of a review from last year. I know we had a spirited discussion, and it was an important discussion on pros and cons. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here is that pros and cons of moving towards different ways of thinking about things.
I think I want to hear the feedback before I ask any more questions.
Kind of too, honestly.
So fair enough. So I'm gonna give this without giving the specifics, and then I'm gonna break down into some specifics. So we broke our focus groups into 3 areas. We had campus administrators, students, and staff. We did get good. I felt like we had a good response rate. So all of these, when you plug them into, and I'm not a expert on statistics and statistical analysis, but there are some programs you can access online where you plug in your total population, you plug in your response group and what level of confidence you want to have, and it can kind of give you a plus and minus on margin of error, and these are all within a margin of error or around 4%, which is a pretty standard valid survey. So we did get 40 responses from campus administrators, which is a very high percentage. We did get 341 responses from secondary staff, teachers specifically, and we did have 870 responses from students, all which fall in a range of valid data. You can see we broke it down into the 4 areas that I mentioned to you earlier, and those were the 4 areas where we did have change. You can see that it's kind of interesting because on each one, on 2 of the 4 areas, you had the highest response from students that it was a positive impact, and on 2 of the 4, you had the highest response from campus administrators that there was a positive impact. And then in 1 of the 4, you actually had from teachers that the second highest level was positive impact. So the question was simply asked like this. It was just a cheap choice answer. Did this change in the student dress code have a positive, or did it not have a positive impact on your campus? So we kept it really simple, and then we allowed in each one, and it was only a 4-question survey. We didn't want it to be something that where we get survey fatigue and it would take 30 minutes to fill it out or any of those things. We said quickly, these were the 4 changes we made. Do you feel like it had a positive or did not have a positive impact on your campus? And then in each case, there was an opportunity for the respondent to give us comments. And so the devil's in the details sometimes. So I really thought that going through the comments is what gave us the context of kind of maybe how people felt the way they did. So the data reflects, like I said, the percentage of survey respondents that felt the change had a positive impact. So you can see, I think the highest of all of those was in piercings. Campus administrators was 100%, 40 out of 40 said that it had a positive or did not have a negative impact. 92.3% of students and 93.8% of staff. Hats is the one where we had the biggest disparity. So, which went from 88% of campus administrator, 94% of students, or really 94.6, 67% of staff. Tights, 98% of campus administrators said it had a positive impact. 86% of students and 75% of staff. And then for student IDs, you also had a disparity. 86% of campus administrators, 92% of students, and 63% of staff said it had a favorable impact. And so I want to really break down into that student ID one because I know that's the one we spent the most time talking about last year, and is the one that's the most interesting to me because I think there's a huge disparity between how our high school folks and our middle school folks feel about IDs. So if you break them down even more, high school had an 80% approval that the ID change was a positive change compared to 46% for our middle school campus. So I thought that was really interesting.
That's the student data? Or
The student data was the student data.
Well, the data that you just said, who was that?
That was for teachers, for staff.
That was
That was for teachers. So for student data, they were both over 90% for both groups, that it was a positive change for their campuses. So as I broke down and really went into the comments, so we had 176 respondents in middle school staff, and 95 of those made comments. And as I broke through those comments, we quickly found that a large percentage of those were tied to COVID implications, and masks were mentioned almost exclusively, that it was very hard, that we don't know our students as well, and for them to not always have an ID present with a mask on makes it really hard for us to tell who that kid is. So I think it was more about that, and I want to go into hats, because hats is an even bigger disparity. So the use of hats, our high school staff had a 93.1% saw that as a favorable change to our student handbook. Middle school staff, there was a 38% saw that as a favorable change to our student handbook. So as I delved into those comments, here's what I found. Of 115 staff members who commented, 71% tied the negative change to a mask or hoodie that was they were uncomfortable with that. So somehow, here's the work that's going to have to be done. The handbook saying that we were going to allow hats to be worn immediately jumped to hoodies, and our staff was extremely uncomfortable with students wearing a hat, hoodie, and a mask at the same time. So of the 115 respondents, 82 made mention of mask or hoodie in their comments. 65 of those had either one or the other, and 17 of those respondents mentioned both. And so we also got comments like, and there's some sprinkled throughout here, students feel more comfortable in class, and it's been nice having one less school-wide rule to enforce. I love that students can wear hoodies and hats. It has saved us so much time and energy policing students this year. We only have had a couple of students issues in regards to long hair and things like that. So, but we did have a lot of them that said, not opposed to hats, but hoodies pulled down over the face is not good. Hoodies weren't mentioned. Hoodies, hats, etc., along with masks, make it virtually impossible to recognize students. So I'm thinking that we're going to have some work to do with our campus administrators this summer on how can we really have these conversations with our teachers when they come back in August about how can we can make them feel better about this, but at the same time, I think that whenever we don't anticipate universal mask wearing, I'm anxious to see how that may change the tenor of how some of our staff feels. Because like I said, in 115 comments on hats, 82 of those comments either mentioned masks, hoodies, or both in conjunction with one another. I did think it was interesting though that the change in high schools, 93% of high school students felt that hats were a positive impact, or excuse me, 93% of high school staff felt that the change in hat requirement was a positive impact as opposed to 38. That's a big disparity. So we may be looking at a different guideline for high school students and middle school students as we work this through with staffs as well. I mean, at one time, Belton had a high school handbook, a middle school handbook, and an elementary handbook, and it was only in recent years that it was combined with one student and parent handbook. So that's kind of what the data shows. Overall, of all respondents in any area, we did not end up with a total negative negative feedback. Our lowest one was 62.5%, but it was still that 62.5% said that it was a favorable change. So let's talk about that data a little bit. I'm sure you have some questions and some thoughts and comments, and I'm sure y'all heard some feedback on it as well.
Nobody even talks about dress code,
Right.
right?
Can we go back to the wording on the
Sure.
dress code? My eyes are old, so I'm not sure. Okay.
Connie's
Thank
gonna put
you.
it out. There we
Woo!
go.
You get 200%
There.
Excellent. Okay. So, first thing that I noticed is that we have used the word sheer clothing twice. And I don't know why. Where is it?
Just bullet 3, bottom
Okay.
down.
On the students may not wear, you got sheer or see-through clothing, then the very, what is it? Oh, 2 up from that. Bandos, spaghetti straps, halter tops, sleeveless undershirts, or sheer clothing. You've got it on my class.
Okay.
Is it in the student code of conduct where we talk about what we do if students break these rules or guidelines? Or is that not listed somewhere?
No, it is, and there's consequences. And like I say, there's consequences in the handbook too, where it talks about.
Okay, but it's not here.
No, I'm just summarizing the
Okay.
dress
Can
standards.
you just
So
tell me what the consequences are if students don't follow our dress code guidelines?
yeah, in some cases they're asked to change clothes. In some cases they may be asked to go home and change clothes, or have someone bring them another set of clothes. I know in some cases at the high school level they've had alternate clothes there: sweatshirts, t-shirts, pants, belts, any of those sorts of things. So I don't think it is necessarily a thing where, the biggest thing is we want to keep kids in class to the greatest extent possible. So it's not a thing where if a teacher says, hey, and the APs handle it, so teachers don't really, if a student walks in and the teacher's not sure if that student's in dress code, they don't make that judgment. They say, hey, why don't you, let's sit you down and check with your AP real quick and make sure you're in codes.
And I know the last thing staff, particularly teachers, want to do is send kids to the office for dress code. I mean, like, nobody's got time for that. But there are 1,000 violations of the dress code. Like, you can go to the high school any day of the week, and there's girls in little skirts and guys wearing things that, they're not part of this policy. And I think parents walk through the high school and they see that, and that's where you get the complaints, because we have a dress code, but staff doesn't enforce it. And I hate to be that blunt, it's just, maybe some staff enforces it, but I was there several times over the last few weeks, and I was surprised. And it's something I hear from a lot of people, and not just at the high school, but middle school level as well.
I mean, I've heard it from some of the kids,
Really?
that it's not enforced consistently.
But I mean, I always, because I see it, I think, well, is that not in our dress code? And so when I saw this on this agenda today, I thought, wow, we really need to ask that question. It's not just what's the consequence for kids, but what are we telling staff? What are we telling teachers in regard to what's their responsibility for? You know, because I know they don't want to do it. I know they don't. I know it's a hassle, and it takes away and it distracts from education. But why do we have a dress code? You know, that's kind of the bottom line. Why have one if we're not gonna follow it?
I think that's a great question.
We got some discussion.
That's my kind of question right there.
No, but I've heard the same thing.
You know, and then we have special events at the school, and dress code is completely out the window.
And athletic events, same thing.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff you see walking.
I don't know, sometimes I just think dress code these days is like, you have to have something written down, but I just don't see it enforced.
I'm gonna give you an example that always used to drive me crazy, and I'm glad I'm not a high school administrator anymore. But I use the second one up there. Shorts, dresses, and skirts must be at least mid-thigh in length. If you've ever been to a volleyball game, our volleyball uniforms don't comply with that dress code, and they haven't for the last 20 years. Just being real honest. Yet we keep putting things like this in here every year, and we have these types of things, and so you have parents and kids who go, wait a minute, they wear it out there, and I can't wear it, and so.
Or do we want the volleyball uniforms being worn in school during the day?
Absolutely.
As a
But
volleyball dad.
one of those things that you sit there and you go, okay, no wonder people get frustrated because we buy uniforms and violate our own policies on these things. So,
That's one of the things that got me on board with hats too. I mean, we can say hats are inappropriate unless we want to do that NHS fundraiser, then we'll let every kid that wants to pay $1 wear a hat. So, as far as the enforcement component of it, I mean, I think we need input on what those guidelines are, but I mean, those are conversations we need to have with campus administrators. If that is the feedback that is coming back to our board of trustees, then that's something that we need to look at.
Holly, off the top of your head, do you know what policy or local policy goes for dress code? I don't know if I remember.
Is it FMCE? Let's look.
I think it'd be interesting to pull up just what our local policy says on that as well.
FNCA student conduct dress code.
FNCA? I was close.
Holly, do you have any experience with districts that don't have a dress code at all?
I don't know, maybe that don't have any dress.
Or very lax dress code?
I know some of the enforcement is very lax.
So that begs the question, as Janet said, I mean, why do we have one?
Because it's not just our students that are being asked to hold to this, it's our staff that's being asked to hold students to this. It's a double responsibility.
So in FNCA local, it says the district's dress code is established to teach grooming and hygiene, instill discipline, prevent disruption, avoid safety hazards, and teach respect for authority. It's the purpose that it says, according to our local policy. And it goes into general guidelines and then extracurricular activities, etc.
On the screen there.
And then when we talked about this a year ago, we also talked about getting ready for the real world as part of the conversation, which is why we kept the pajamas in there.
That's right.
Yeah, I remember that.
I remember that too.
courts have typically said, we don't want to play Uber administrator, and we'll let schools have, dress code requirements if they can basically state kind of a pedagogical purpose, and so that's language that you'll see in court cases on dress code issues as well.
I like our line about hair. It's not a distraction. I like that. You know, I don't know how hair can be a distraction,
That's all right.
quite frankly, these days, but I'm just saying, there's no detail to it. It's just, here's a principle we're gonna live by, kind of thing. And if there was a way for us to get dress code to principles instead of a list of things, I think that's what we're doing anyway.
Well, so the question comes into how's it represented in the larger document that it sits in, right? Like, hopefully there's an intro to this that says, hey, look, here's why we have a dress code, right? Maybe we should put that in there. It's not there.
I mean, it goes back to the purposes of the policy, is to, they're reflective of the district's values, beliefs, standards, right?
The other thing that you'll see, Janet, in cases, a lot of times the challenges that you get to dress code are First Amendment challenges.
Sure.
And so the courts will say, if it's not specific enough, then it's kind of void for vagueness, you know, basically that the First Amendment analysis purposes, and you have to give students notice that's clear enough for them to understand what was prohibited by the
Of course,
policy.
we don't have anything on there about what slogans or logos or statements on shirts or we don't have anything about that.
Is that in it may be in policy.
It's in the code of conduct.
Yeah, it says the district prohibits pictures, emblems, or writings on clothing that are lewd, offensive, vulgar, or obscene, or advertise or depict tobacco products, alcoholic beverages, drugs, or any other substance prohibited under FNCFB.
And that's where I get confused with the code of conduct and the.
I can include all that in a Friday report, and then we can come back and revisit it if there's more. I mean, this is one section of a 100-page or 70-page document, so I would be more than happy to include where it prefaces that and where it talks about consequences and those types of things.
I think we need to have a dress code, but if we have a dress code, the dress code needs to be enforced equally, because if we don't enforce it equally, then we get ourselves in trouble.
And if we have a dress code that can't be enforced,
Right.
we need to talk about that.
Right.
If there is a cultural reason we cannot enforce this, it's too burdensome. We need to think about that.
You're right. You know, logistically, we don't have a meeting next month. So if we were gonna delve into this and make any changes, then it has to be done in August.
Truthfully, we have to get administrators together first. Mike's got some other things to walk you through of next steps in process. So I don't think we're not at a point where we're presenting to you administrative recommendations yet. We're just talking about process and what we found so far. But I think your question, Janet's a really good one. Just personally, having worked from the assistant principal level and the principal level, we can write a whole list of stuff that would take up every administrator's entire day enforcing a dress code in a 2000 student high school.
And so, more important than talking to us is talking to staff. Talking to teachers, talking to principals. What do they see? What do they hear? Why is it hard? What would be better?
And I think that's where we had those focus groups last year, right?
I mean, I guess we need to know if there is an enforcement issue. I mean, there's three of us here that, that's been communicated to or actually seen it, so, but, I mean, is that actually true? And if it is, what are we gonna do about it?
You know, when I was in high school, if a boy had a 5 o'clock shadow, they'd jerk him in the office and make him shave. I mean, they were strict about
Sure.
every last little thing.
Right. Yeah, that wouldn't pass muster in 1978.
No.
Alright, so it sounds like there are some next steps here, right, already.
There
In
are.
the process, right, so can we get back to the IDs? I mean, the first thing that came to mind when you were reading those stats to me was actually, okay, so can we split the policies, or and can it be different in middle school and high school? You said that. Related to badges, I mean, I understand the hat, hoodie, face mask thing, and you get away with never seeing a kid's face pulled down over his eyes. You never actually see him. So I mean, I can completely get that frustration. Hopefully, we're not going to have that frustration next year.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see this next year.
But I could completely see having two separate, you know, a middle school view on it and a high school view on it. And keep it the way it is for the high school and have the middle schoolers wear it. I don't know.
Mike, do you think that the results could have been wholly different had we not had a mask mandate?
Based on the comments, I think so.
I mean, it
There were
seems like-
lots and lots of comments about masks.
It seemed like if we were to do anything, we'd have to go through another year with the same rule.
Like I say, and where this recommendation originally came from was campus administrators. And I mean, they're overwhelmingly in favor of thinking that it was positive, almost 90%. So said that it was a positive. And the ones who didn't also tied it to masks as well. There were administrative comments as well about.
I like your statement about not trying to devalue the purpose of an ID. I mean, initially it was a security issue, right?
I mean, that was the argument, right?
It was,
How close is the transportation piece of it? It's still two separate badges, right?
right now it is. We're
Yeah.
wanting to move to one ID that has the barcode and the chip, the encoded chip all in the same ID. It's only a matter of a phone call and a PO to get that done. So that's kind of where we want to go next.
I mean, would we dare say that, you know, for lunches you get a discount with your badge? Instead of going to the back of the line?
Well, next year we're still going to seamless summer, so all kids will eat free.
Okay, yeah, all right, that's an excellent point.
There you go.
And I guess not to devalue, but also to incentivize, not be another way to look at it. So
Would there be a way that like a kid is not in anything, they don't ride a bus, they don't eat a school lunch, they could theoretically come to school without an ID and be just fine all day? They wouldn't need it.
they would need it if someone asked for it, and there's still consequences. If you're asked to provide your ID and you don't, then you go get a new one. If you still refuse and don't do that, then I mean they have the same things that were in place, the same consequences that were in place for if you were strike one, strike two, strike three, you're going to be home or whatever. I mean the same things are still in place. It's just if I ask you for your ID and you refuse, now you've crossed over from not only not having your ID, but to being insubordinate and whatever consequences that would come with that.
Have there been any security issues that have arisen since the change?
None that, I mean, there were some comments in there about some people's level of comfort. And I think it's level of comfort about, we had the same discussion last year though. I still think how close does a person have to be for me to really know if that is that person's ID or not? So, I mean, if I'm at one end of the hallway and Matt's at the other, and I can see a piece of plastic, do I really know if that's Matt's ID or not? I mean, it's kind of, I have to wait till I get to that point where I can either see it or ask him to see it. And so we have the right as a staff to ask for an ID at any time. And the student is expected to produce that ID when asked. And I think that, to me, that's a valuable piece of this too, is if you're asked to present your ID and you're refused, there needs to be consequences.
Well, it's like driving without a license. You
Right.
need to have your license when you drive, period.
If you're asked to produce an ID and you can't because you don't have one, now I think we go into separate measures of, what do we do in that situation?
There's a loophole, my seventh grader will find it.
Run it by him.
My second grader would have lost it.
So all in all, favorable.
It's all been favorable. I mean, the lowest that we had of every category when asked, did this have a favorable impact or not on your campus was 63% was the lowest response in 12 categories.
I do find the staff trendage,
Yeah, the difference between high school and middle school.
Yeah, and just in general, even if you don't split it out, right?
Oh,
Staff is so much lower for hats, so much lower for tights. slower for IEPs, do they have the why? Going back to your question, right, it's all about the why, and can we communicate the why?
Which is where I get back to principles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't mean physical principles, I mean like
Right.
ideological
Right.
principles.
Alright.
Well, and I think if you wanna look at it too, in a COVID summer, a lot of things was done virtually. A lot of time was spent discussing mitigation strategies and probably not as much time talking handbook philosophy. Here's what we're gonna get out of this. When teachers came back, I bet probably the deep level conversations between principals and staff probably didn't occur that you would hope whenever you do have some dress code changes. And I mean, if you think back to where we all were in August, I mean, we were rewriting the school calendar and putting school off until September 8th because the state said we couldn't come in person until September 8th. So, I mean, not to kick the can down the road, but I bet you there was a lot of discussions about hand sanitizers and masks and how we were gonna keep staff safe and not as much about leggings and caps.
I hate to make any change based off of last year. I mean, really, any change to the policy, I think we can change how we talk about it,
Right.
but I hate to make any change to the policy just based off of last year.
And I do think your question or your comment about did staff understand why is a good one, because I don't know how much time we spent talking about some of those things. To Mike's point, I think we had a lot of other stuff on the plate in some of those.
In retrospect, some of these changes may have been good to put them off another year until all of our kids weren't wearing masks.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's where, you know, looking back at the feedback now, this would have been nice feedback in like October.
Right.
He's like, said, hey, let's back off these a little bit. Let's put the hats down and put the IDs back on for a little while so everyone's a little more comfortable. But I think that was a recurring theme in our where we did dip down into the 60s. Masks was a recurring theme in both regards.
Mike, what are next steps for you?
If you go to the next slide, so next steps is we're actually going to be talking some handbook with our superintendent student advisory council tomorrow morning, and looking forward to that and kind of see their perspective. We need to spend a little more time with campus principals on hoodies and kind of get their feedback on that, because that was something that wasn't explicitly stated in the dress code, but it's definitely something that's on teachers and staff minds. There's some grading modifications. I think there was some information in the board bulletin last Friday. We're finalizing some grading changes that were going to be included. Receiving final TASB recommendations. We have the TASB model handbook, trying to see if any legislative session or special session items could impact that. Looking through the complete list, and I'm glad Holly's here, she may can weigh in on this too, but looking through the complete list of either legislative items that impact education that have either been signed or are sitting on the governor's desk right now, I see very little that's going to impact student handbook. I see a lot that will impact other areas, but not student handbook as much.
That's what I've seen so far too, but every day I'm coming across something that is pretty significant and horrible, and I don't know how it passed, but, so we'll see on that, but I don't think anything in the special sessions will touch the student handbook.
So our goal was to have a final product in your June board packet so that y'all could review it. I mean, obviously, the handbook is kind of unique in a way too. It doesn't specifically require board approval, although we do feel like you guys need to be very well informed and have opportunities to give us feedback at any point. And we're gonna try to take that feedback and make a better product. So we do have a little bit of wiggle room where to get you guys a product, give y'all a chance to review it, give us feedback. I mean, ultimately, we need to have something that's in our campus administrators' hands where they have ample time to review, look at campus implications, and be ready to discuss that with their staff when their staff comes back. So I think last year we were a little later on the 8 ball with that, and so I do think that's kind of the challenge here, is making sure that they have it in enough time that they're comfortable with it and they can discuss it with their staffs and how it impacts their campus. But I will echo, this has been campus administrator driven process now for 2 years, and we're really trying to honor what the feedback they're giving us on what they feel like is gonna provide a situation where they can have a safe and effective campus that provides lots of opportunities for positive interactions with students where great learning is taking place. So we're gonna miss the mark sometimes, and we're gonna have to go back and look at things and say, hey, what were we thinking there? But I do think these things, but the great question is having discussions about enforcement and where are enforcement challenges, and do we have further recommendations from them on how we can kind of make sure that that can be accomplished.
Keeping in mind the purpose. Yes. So what is the ideal time, Mike? Would it be July?
Really, our goal was to try to hit the June board meeting, but and from a standpoint of what we can do internally, we can hit that. I think the danger is if we say that June 21st or June 19th, we have a final product, and then we get something from the legislative session or update, 118, is that what it'll be, that says differently than so I think that, to me, that the challenge is what we may get from a legislative perspective right now. And internally, I think we're really close. I mean, I think we've got our feedback. We want to give these things kind of a chance with no mask and see how they go. We want to have better discussions with our campus staff, and we want to get with our middle school staff and see, do we need to be a little more restrictive on some of the middle school things, and how does that work? And I think we can do all those fairly quickly. Is there going to be something legally that we're going to be required to put into the code of conduct or handbook that hasn't includes?
And we'll know for sure by July 9th. TASB does their legislative update on July 9th, and they'll have everything figured out by then, for sure.
So I think it would be totally, for you guys to have what we would consider a final draft in early July, then for some time to look at it. So.
And regarding the enforcement piece, I think we'll study that. So I think we need to get a better sense of that. Again, if your policy and your practice are way out of whack, then we've got issues on some of those things. And I think we need to look at that a little bit more. Some of it might be the policy itself, some of it might be in practice itself.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank
Good job, Mike.
Dr. Love Smith's up. So just a reminder, we were asked to bring you all some additional information regarding policy PIC local. First of all, that you wanted to take a look at that and discuss it more in your committee. And then when we brought it, we said we would follow up with a few different things. This is part 3 of 3, I believe, regarding follow-up.
That is correct. So just again, our purpose is to continue that conversation. And then I just always like to start with, on the next slide, our driving questions and what we're really answering when we're looking at this data, and how does ranking impact our students during a college administration process, especially for students outside of the top 10, what barriers exist that prevent students from following their pathway, and how does class ranking course weighting impact journey or graduate competencies. So the third piece we're looking at tonight is the kind of analysis of transcript data. Couple of things I want to just point out before I get into any questions you might have and what you saw. One, the class of 2021 is the first official class to be combined. So for this data purposes, we did just use a scenario of assuming we had combined them. Just for reference purposes, knowing that moving forward, we are currently in a state where policy says they would be combined. This is also representative of data prior to the policy change in our 4 levels. So those 4 levels that we've been talking about really go into impact with our current seniors. So this is when we had the increased number weighting. What you can see, and what we did was looked at total number of graduates in the class, number of spots that have been in the top 10. And we looked at that, so you can see numbers might not always add up. It would be dependent on, so for instance, in the first one, when you look at number in Belton High School and number in UTEC, that actually totals 80. However, when you combine them, it makes an 81. So just remembering that the number of graduates in the class is what in fact determines the number of students that end in the top 10. We looked at their GPA average, the range, then we looked at advanced courses. This is specifically our AP courses, and then we looked at dual credit. We looked at that so first what you're seeing is the top 10%. So before I share anything, I'm curious if you had any ahas or notices or questions specific to top 10%. And I apologize, it's a little hard to see, but if you need to zoom out that one more.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to see that New Tech's average was lower in 18 and 19 and then higher in 20. And because that pattern didn't hold when you look at the 20%, right? So all of that. But, oh yeah, what I'm trying to figure out is, okay, great, if it hadn't been combined, how many kids would have been dropped off from either side? And it looks like it's 1 or 2 at most, right? Like, it's so close.
They kind of insert in the middle there, and then kind of ends with Belton High School. Any other noticings or questions or no?
Or what should I be noticing?
Well, so I'm gonna find out. Well, no, just something I noticed. Yeah, I'm gonna say, I appreciate that. I just wanted to kind of give y'all an opportunity too. So we're really discussing this. It's not just, I never want it to be one way. But just to notice that you can make it into the top 10% having taken dual credit courses. But we do see a difference there. So so what the range tells me is that so when I look at Belton High School, there is a student that is in the top 10% having taken 10 dual credit courses. So the range that contributed to who was in the top 10 was anywhere from they took no courses to they took 10 courses. And we see the same is true in our AP courses. There is somebody who took as few as 1 AP course and took as many as 14. So we do see, so that was an interesting piece to see. You'll see that goes up ever so slightly when you get to the top 20%. So I think that was just to really see those ranges of what our kids are taking, anywhere from 3 to 15, 1 to.
I would say the average number of AP courses taken kind of blew my mind when I saw it.
And that's over the course of the whole.
Yeah, or even over the course of 4 years, that still blows my mind.
That's a lot.
Yeah, and there is one outlier, right? New Tech in 2018, right? It was 4.8, right? So what changed from New Tech? The average was 4.8 in 2018, and all of a sudden it jumped to 8, and then it jumped to 11.
Yeah.
Right. Like so, something happened there.
We
Like they're being
increased-
advised differently, or something.
Could be advised differently. We have over time continued to increase AP course offerings. Maybe made more course offerings available for them to take at Belton High School if it wasn't offered at New Tech. I mean, could be many variables in that. There's something else you just mentioned right before that.
Just the sheer number.
Oh, the sheer number.
Yeah.
So, something to just know, Nat, is that you do not take, we are now offering 1 AP course their freshman year, and then a few more their sophomore year in history, I want to say. So those predominantly represent their junior and senior years. And that's an average, that's a significant average, whereas dual credit, I can tell you, it was very few, like maybe under 5 students that would be in the top 10% having taken a dual credit course.
My first response when I looked at this slide was just playing the GPA game. Especially when you look at the other data you provided.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the greatest thing we want to take away and hopefully end with tonight is how do we take everything we've talked about. So this is, every time we come, it's kind of been a little in isolation. Like we first talked about student surveying, and then we talked about college admissions, and now this is just one more piece. But no one piece gives us everything, and we've gotta kind of put all that together and really think about what's this telling us. When we go to top 20%, you definitely see, the range in GPAs change. So it definitely is a much larger range and not as, quite as tight. Again, I think on dual credit, you see just a slight tip, increase in dual credit, at New Tech for last year. The average seems to stay the same for Belton High School. Any other wonderings or questions around this piece? Because then I'm gonna kind of shift this a little bit.
And the obvious thing is that there's a corresponding drop in the GPA with the number of AP courses taken.
So the drop in GPA is, yes, so when you move to top 20%, you do see the number of GPA courses average decrease. You see more dual credit. So what this doesn't quite show is you pick up a lot more of your dual credit students in the top 20%. So there aren't as many AP courses being taken from our dual credit bioscience students.
I do want to talk a little bit about some of that data in regard to our discussion about college acceptance of AP and
Absolutely,
when you're ready.
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. So the next piece is college earned, the slide, page 15, yes, college credit earned by advanced placement. And so what this is talking about is when you look at advanced placement or AP courses, if you take the test and you get a 3 or higher, and the college or university you're looking at accepts that, you can potentially earn college credit. With our dual credit courses, if you pass the class, you earn the college credit, and if you're a Texas state school, they accept it because we offer courses that are on a standard state acceptance. That just changed for private, so if I am going to Baylor University, they may or may not take that credit. So we specifically looked at our students that had been enrolled in our AP courses. We did not include the class of 2020 because last year was just an anomaly. Many courses, exams were canceled. But we did look over 2 years at our core courses, so not all courses, but we looked specifically at AP courses that have a dual credit equivalent. So my AP stats class, we do not offer a dual credit equivalent for, but English language and composition, we do. We have a dual credit. So we wanted to kind of look at that and let you see where students could have the potential to earn college credit. And I think the reason we're looking at this and the why is because we have been wrestling with, should they be earning the same amount of, should they be considered the same in weighting when end result is potentially college course or college credit? And so we wanted to look at this. Now, I think you'll see our percentage, so the way this reads is I had 55% of our students that elected to take the AP exam for English language composition. Of those 55, 81 earned credit. That is 39% of the entire population that could have. So I don't want that to be confusing. There was some question around that. It's how many of the entire 208 took the exam? 55%. How many of the entire 208 are actually potentially earn the credit? That is a 3 or higher, but there's still so much variable in that. That was 39%.
39 of the 55?
39 of the
Of the
208. And so you can see it's roughly depends on the course, but in this somewhere anywhere between 30 or actually 22 and 59% of our students elect to take the exam and then do well enough on it to potentially earn the college credit. And I think this brings us back nicely to a question that maybe I didn't do as great of a job answering first time around. It's slide 16, and that was when we asked students about taking, like, why are you not taking the AP exam? I gave some reasons, and then there was some questioning around, hey, could we unpack those reasons a little bit? And could we provide a number of those responding and you know, who responded in that way? So done that with, for instance, when 31 students, when they answered reasons for not taking an exam, they further made comments around and referenced the cost of the exam. The question we had a couple months ago was specifically around that feeling unprepared, and could we unpack that a little bit? What we learned from student data on that is we do have a high belief of failure among kids, but then we also have a lot of we had kids saying that might be because I'm barely passing the class. So like, I took an AP exam, I'm really struggling in this current class with the rigor of this class. I do not feel confident to get a 3. We had other kids who just said, I don't feel prepared, I don't want to lose money, was specifically they reference money, but again, I think that's kind of aligned with that. I don't think I'm going to pass, I'm not going to get a 3 or higher, I don't know that my college is going to take this, so it's not something I need to spend money on. And so that was kind of one that you would ask, could we unpack a little bit? I think you see that when they say they don't take those exams, that's reflected in that slide before of we don't have very high rate. And now I will tell you, College Board has changed their timelines, and so now kids are making that decision early on in the course. Like, you make it before this, halfway through the first semester.
That's a lot of pressure.
It is, and so it kind of sets a mindset even for a kid of where they're at with taking this course. We do not require you to take the exam, and we do have, there is a reduced amount for cost of exams in terms, if you qualify financially, but then there is no current assistance on, once you take those exams, the cost associated with any college or university in terms of having them, you know, add that to your transcript. I mean, there's a lot of cost beyond just taking an exam.
The one that says it's not necessary for my college, I feel like we could start there. Like, right there, those 34 kids, they should have been counseled, you know, they need to be counseled. Okay, let's look at what your plans are here. I mean, that right there would just be like your easiest baseline of helping kids understand the difference between AP and dual credit and what would be best for their path.
So I agree, because I know, you know, and that's where it's been hard in the GPA gaining, for lack of a better word, because I mean, I can tell you, I've counseled kids, if you're going to be a math major, I highly recommend that you take every AP math course that we offer, and depending on what in maths and our AP science, our English courses would be great opportunities to take dual credit. If going to your college, you see in your plan that you're going to need 3 hours of English, and that's what you need, you might meet that requirement. And so it, and the reverse would be true for those that are English majors. And so it's so individual for every student. And I think that's kind of what goes back to our policies and what we've been wrestling with. And the heart of it is, how do we design a policy that doesn't prevent a barrier for each and every student to follow their pathway?
Deanna, would it be possible for you to break that slide down about who took AP exams and who passed AP exams or got the credit for it into PHS and UTEC for us?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to bring it back here, I guess you just email it to us, but
Okay.
whatever's best on that. And, okay, anecdotal story is that when our oldest son, we enrolled him in, biotech, was it called?
Bioscience
Science
Institute at WPS.
program. And right after we did, we made a call to UT and just said, okay, he's in this program. If he were to continue on in this, are you going to accept these credits? Because we knew that they did at A&M, but we couldn't find a single soul who had done this with UT. So we had to call UT to find out. And they said, well, we will accept them, no problem, but we're also gonna make him take the classes again. So there's another piece to this that we can't forget, that just because, yes, they see them the same, they don't really see them the same. Yes, admittance is the same, but once you get in, they understand that you might need a little bit more content.
And that varies by university.
Yes,
That's what I'm saying,
absolutely.
that varies
Everybody's gotta
Exactly.
understand that.
every university.
It does.
And so I think that goes back to just conversations we've even been having about just counselors and partnerships with parents and knowing what's on either end. Like you mentioned, you calling, like how do we support those conversations so that.
So consequently, we told our son this, and he said, well, I don't want to continue on in bioscience because I don't want to take the classes again. What would be the point of that, you know? So, and he ended up not using that field anyway, so.
Yeah, that is the challenge. It's and it's a different answer for each and every student.
Deanna, how much input have the counselors had with your team in looking at this issue?
We have worked, I mean, we've had several conversations with them, and we've had them over the years, with just what do they see on the forefront, what do they hear, what, you know, and we've had to, spend quite a bit of time in even, professional learning for them on making sure they know some of the nuances, because it impacts how they have to advise kids and making sure that there's no surprises in GPA.
You know, this question may be a bit premature, and if it is, just say, look, I don't have enough. I need to ponder it more. How would you feel about weighing the AP course and the dual credit the same?
I continue to ponder that answer. And I think I'm hesitating because I'm a little nervous to give maybe my personal opinion and then it impact others' opinions. Because I think we all need to honor each other's. I just continue to go back to, is there a barrier that influences a student to make one decision over another that we created? And I feel like when they're weighted differently, there is. And it's hard because this just is so complex.
Yeah, and then the trick is, then do you create another barrier by changing it to something else? Like, that's always the answer. You're trying to unravel it and then you end up tangling it again over here.
And so, you know, and I think listening to the colleges, and it's hard because, you know, we heard what they said, that they often look at them the same, but then we know there's other stories, just like you said, that are out there. And so that is a challenge.
And I think in our last meeting, we kind of discussed the potential of making some classes
Yes.
weighted the same. And
So,
I think we were kind of interested and intrigued by it.
so let's go there. Let's look at the next slide. And let's really look at that paragraph, the next one after that, where we get into our current EIC local policy on page 17.
Hold on, it's not going
It's
to.
okay.
You know, Deanna, that one slide, when I first looked at that, I thought, you know what, the intent,
That's
in
great.
taking an AP course is not for the credit.
And see,
she's
that's
just looking at
another,
policy,
that's a great comment, because when we're
Oh.
trying
Just needs a
to
policy.
Oh, thank you.
remove ourselves
where's the
from a
rest of it?
culture of one test on one
Thanks for
day
that.
defines
That's
what all you
freaking
know. I mean, I think we have to be careful with that too, because there are kids that, I'm glad that kid is taking an AP course, and there's some merit in their struggle, and that's okay, and if they don't want to take the test, I'm okay with that. Now, if they wanna take it, and we wanna encourage them, we wanna help every kid be successful, so there's two sides to that conversation. When you look at our policy, and you look at the paragraph on calculation, look at what this policy currently does, because right now, it weights every course in English, math, math above algebra, science, social studies, economics, and languages other than English. We could, remember, we have 15 courses. We could designate specific courses. We could say, you know what, in social studies, I use that one because I think it's a really great example. In social studies, we're going to weight courses that we have like AP Human Geo or World Geography, World History, Government and Economics, and U.S. History. We might weight those 4. What then that frees up is for a kid to take special topics in social studies at no expense to their GPA, because it's not included in the calculation. And we heard and saw that in the feedback from students on courses that they have chosen not to take. If we're only weighting maybe one class a year in those 4 contents, then we do free up space in their schedule for them to take the CTE courses that they've expressed. The challenge to that is we would have some AP courses that might not make that criteria, and they would be taking an AP course with no weighting. So, I mean, you've got to wrestle with that. Like there's sometimes unintended, we just want to make sure we know all the consequences of any kind of decision you look at, that you all feel comfortable with, so that we're not surprised by potential consequences that could happen from that. So I'm curious, we're at the 3rd meeting, we've looked at the data pieces, I'm curious where your thoughts are right now, what other questions you might have, or what you're thinking.
Well, I think you've answered my question as to why kids are taking AP courses, pretty much because of the GPA. They're not doing it because of the dual credit. I mean, I think you.
Yeah, there's
that's the
definitely
way
a
I
tendency
interpret
to
it.
take.
Yeah.
Well, some of them are. Some of them are. The top 10%, 5% are.
And some of them are taking, we saw an average of 9, but some of them are taking 15.
Wow.
And they can, if they do well, they can get out of a significant amount of college courses and have excellent knowledge in that content.
Chris, you were about to say something.
Oh, I mean, I got lots of fun. I mean, my heart hurts around the 107 that say they feel unprepared. Like that opens a whole nother can of worms
That's a whole other
that
thing.
we're not even going.
I was bothered by that too.
I don't know. I haven't seen anything that says we shouldn't weigh them the same. The can of worms, right? You fix a problem over here and another one pops up. Okay, so if we only weight 5, I'm just pulling a random number out of my hat. Okay, so what are the unintended consequences there? Well, there might be a bunch of courses that now kids don't want to take, right? So there's offerings that go away, right? Because we can't fill those classes. And if nobody wants to take them, maybe we shouldn't offer them, right? But like there's a whole domino effect. I think that's a much nastier problem potentially than weighting them the same. I don't know. I mean, I guess what I can't tell necessarily, if I look at like the top 10 and top 20, like I can't necessarily tell, well, what would be the impact if we had weighted them the same.
The reason behind weighting AP higher, I guess philosophically, would be because it has more rigor, correct? I mean, this would be the reason for making it.
Supposedly,
Yes, supposedly.
I would say supposedly on
Yes,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
And,
I
so
get
that, there's that.
Yeah.
And what
But
about
then if you look at the
weighting,
outcome,
if you weigh an AP course the same as dual credit, maybe you give it additional weight if the test is passed?
So that is an option, that we could consider. I think an unintended consequence would be, could then a student potentially have an advantage to a higher GPA because they can afford a specific number of exams where another student could not. That would be one question I'd wonder. Would we be perpetuating this concept of one test on one day matters? And we often say it's one test on one day and it's just one picture. So I think we just have to wrestle. I mean, it's a great conversation tool because everything we do will have consequences, and we've just got to talk through if it's hard.
What's the cost comparison to taking a dual credit and AP exam?
A dual credit course is, I want to say right at $185, somewhere in that ballpark. Remember that course cost varies depending on whether or not you live in Belton or Temple based on rates for Temple. So it's somewhere in that ballpark. An AP exam is I think $85, but it can be decreased, like I want to say it's like $13 if you need financial eligibility. But that's the first level of cost on an AP exam because colleges sometimes add on fees to accept that course into their program. Certain, so there could be.
If we look at when we weigh things now, then we look at an AP course as being more difficult than a dual credit.
Again, that varies by teacher, professor. So AP courses are a product of the College Board, which is a company. It's a for-profit company. And so we do use their curriculum. But again, whereas with dual credit, it is the college's curriculum. I mean, it is often their professor, although we continue to work with our colleges and universities to hire folks. We would love for them to hire our staff. And then it would be really hard to discuss a difference between AP and dual credit when, if in fact it was both taught by our individual. But there's so much variability.
I mean, for just a parent looking at it, if I'm looking at it, well, that's why they're doing it, because it's more difficult. You're giving it more weight, then it must be more difficult.
I think that's the
I think
perception.
that's the perception.
I don't necessarily know that that's true. And I think the College Board does a good job of perpetuating that perception. Again, they're a for-profit company, and I think they do a really good job of saying that their learning is deeper and quote more rigorous, and that word rigor is something that we can debate really heavily on a lot of those things.
What would the dual credit folks say about that?
I
do they
You mean
respond
like
to
the students or the teachers?
that? No, the institutions, like
I
Baylor,
think
Baylor, Temple College, whoever's offering.
they're proud of their courses. They're proud of their curriculum. They're proud of their staff.
Have
And
we
so-
done any interviews with kids on that topic? Like, do they, if you took this class or over this, would they think?
So I think a challenge in that is, I mean, they'll tell you our AP courses, but again, it varies by, I mean, I've heard dual credit teachers that were extremely hard, and then I've heard AP teachers that were as well. But you're not gonna have a student that's taking the same course in two different ways. So there's some variability there. You know, and I've had our kids, say that they like the dual credit because they leave it and they have their college. I mean, we have kids right now that have significant number of hours in dual credit, leaving with an associate's degree, because of their work.
In theory, that kid might not even be able to make the top 10%.
Exactly.
I mean, that's where my heartburn is, but.
It makes sense, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
I'll throw one later on real quick, just to think about. Belton ISD does not have an IB program. IB also kind of perpetuates some of these things, and you have some districts say that IB is more rigorous than AP. So in the same mindset that you brought up, so then would you have another level where IB courses if we had an IB program?
It's IB.
International Baccalaureate. And it's, kind of perceived as one of the most rigorous courses of study in high school. And so again, it's really, the whole purpose of this was we were asked to bring forward some data and information so that you all, in examining a local policy that impacts every kid in the district, can have some good information to think about. I think we've got some problems with it personally in the way we're currently weighted in our GPAs. I really do. I think we have to examine what we want for the kids in our system. What is it that we really want for the student experience to be? And does this policy help that, or does it perpetuate something else? And so that's kind of where we are right now. I think as an administrative team, we can bring back some recommendations and some ideas that we've been mulling over. Deanna and her team have been thinking through a lot of things that they might propose as next steps. To Janet's point earlier, I don't know if they're 100% right, but I think they're probably worth some additional discussion, because I do think we have some challenges in our system.
Deanna, if the kid takes a dual credit course and they make a C in the course, they still get the same weight? Does he get the credit?
They receive both the weight and the credit. And they don't receive the same weight. So if a student makes a 70 in a dual credit and a student makes a 70 in an AP, weighting purpose-wise, the AP course will be weighted higher.
Right.
Credit-wise, they both pass, they both earn the credit.
Yeah.
And then the 70 dual credit student will earn the college credit, and the AP student may or may not earn the college credit depending on if they then took the exam or not. So there's like that next layer.
My question is, if you're taking the dual credit,
Okay.
if the kid makes an A or a B or a C, in terms of weight, it's the same, right? Into the GPA.
Yeah, just the dual credit.
They're
It
all
has a
weighted,
certain weight.
they're weighted the same, but earning an A and earning a 70 does not land the same number towards my GPA. Because when we weight a course, so in this policy, it was adding, I think, 10 points. Now in our new tiered system, we break down what goes and calculates into your GPA, but we value every single numerical grade. So a 99 is weighted different from a 98, from a 97. Now remember, we did look at some policies early on that did say, I'm gonna put a range in, and that range is gonna earn the same equivalent. So but those ranges were like a 90 to a 100, or a 95 to 100. And so that stops I've got a 95 and you got a 97, and I gotta really make sure I get 2 more points to catch up to you, which game plan goes on.
How does Temple College report that? Do they report someone receiving an A or a B or a C? How do they do it?
Temple College does report a numerical grade.
Numerical grade.
They do.
All the dual credit folks that we.
All the dual credit partners, and we do have that requirement timeline for when they have to have it reported by. Remember, that's what we did the resolution on, just so we can calculate it in.
You know, that example you gave, Chris, about kid earning.
You can get an associate's degree and still not be in the top 10%.
Right.
I mean, now, you have to have done well in those classes,
Yeah.
but.
Well, let's say that you had a 95 in all of your dual credit courses. and you're an associate's, you could still not be in the top 10%. Right?
Yeah, I mean, where I've heard feedback is folks who are going through TBI, who, you know, their kids don't make it in the top 10% and they're walking with associate's degrees. I mean, do you have a degree in hand? Like, there's no more proof than I got a degree in hand. Now, you could argue, are all degrees created equal, right? But,
There's always arguments.
Yeah,
both
so,
ways.
so let's see some recommendations and we can try to figure out.
Yeah.
Next step?
Yeah, I think that's the next step.
Yeah.
Let's get some recommendations and look at some, are there any neighboring school districts that are doing this, like close by? Changing the way they rank things, rate things.
I mean, districts, like, this is a moving target for districts all the time. I mean, they're always revisiting their EIC. And we looked, so when we look at things, we look often at our neighboring districts, but we also we've kind of identified this group of districts across the state that we know what they're doing instructionally. They have strong, sound instructional programs, maybe demographics similar to ours. Even if they're much larger systems, some of them we know have Journey of a Graduate or equivalent competencies or just sound, like really strong instructional programs, and we look at those. And, I mean, they just vary across this is one of those policies that really is driven by the circumstances of the local district. I mean, I've seen districts that rate them all the same. We know districts that don't rank at all. We've looked at districts that don't count dual credit at all, because maybe they have multiple partners, especially when you get up into the like Dallas-Fort Worth area. So it's really.
Can I just share my personal opinion over what I've heard so far from all these places?
Absolutely.
At this point, I feel like we may not be completely ready to go completely unranked. But we might be potentially able to just rank the top 25%. And potentially explore the beginning of ranking some dual credit and some AP listening. I think that's maybe step one, if, just a thought in that direction.
Did you say rank though?
You don't want to eat the whole pie at the same time.
I feel like our community might,
Yeah, I agree with you.
But I think getting to Nirvana is not happening in one step. Like,
It is not.
Yeah.
There is no way in the world.
if we even were to get there. Yeah.
that's just my thoughts after all of what I've heard. That I think, just based on my feeling about this community, I think we might be able to get people there to start with.
And when you said rank, I want to hear, you said maybe rank only the what?
Top 25%.
Top 25.
And we might could just do 20.
We'd still be ranking at that point.
You're still ranking, yeah. I would tell you it's the top 25. It's the top 10 that's the rough. After 25%, I don't hear much about concerns about where I rank.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying that there's really no purpose in anything beyond 25%.
But does that really change anything?
It changes it in the fact that kids don't have to hear that they're at the bottom of the class. That's one thing. So what would you say, just top 10%? Because we already do that, right? We have to do that.
You have to do that. So we've talked to schools that only rank their top 10%, and we've heard everything from they tell you who you are to I just tell you you're in the top 10%, and I don't tell you where you're at in that place. So we've heard that gamut of.
Which is kind of like being unranked.
Close to being unranked, but you
And
still.
I don't know that we're ready for that part, that piece yet.
Yeah, so that's really, at that point, it'd probably be best to just look at an unranked, because then at an unranked, you can tell the college we do not rank, and that forces everyone to be looked at differently, but you still have to report your top 10%. There's some nuances there. I need to really become really good friends with Holly.
We have to look at that together.
So,
and really answer a lot of questions. And I agree with you, that's a really big step. And I don't know that our community's really quite ready to go that far. But I do think they could be ready for
That far, how far?
being completely in
completely
range.
in range.
I would agree, I mean,
You know,
I think that's a huge step that,
My thought would be to rank the top 10% because there's so much that comes from that. I mean, obviously the legal requirement, but aside from that, there's so much benefit the kids receive from being in the top 10%. But you know, one of the things that we haven't discussed, and we spent so much time over the last several months, is the competencies, the journey of a graduate. So if we're gonna spend so much time doing that, and then we had the community involved in that, then that needs to play a significant part of what we do with this EIC.
Mhm.
But we haven't said anything about that. So that has to play a significant part in what we do and any changes that we make to this policy.
Absolutely. And I think we see some of those, as we want our students to design their pathway. I think one that immediately comes to mind is collaboration. And how do I build a system where kids will collaborate with each other when they're in courses where it's very competitive. And it's competitive because if you and I are vying for, and we know, and the kids know, they know who is where, then am I less likely to collaborate with you if I'm competing against you?
I can tell you stories that say yes.
Well, I could too, I'm just asking the question. But I do think you're right, I think we've gotta think about each one of those, adaptability, perseverance, they all play a role in what we want our kids to design for themselves.
And all that work that was done by everyone, I mean, involved a significant portion of community involvement.
And all of that at the same time that you prepare kids fully and completely for whatever career path they want.
Right.
All of that.
Just an interesting side note, something to think about as we start to dive into recommendations on this and stuff. Often you see in some of your, I shouldn't say often, sometimes you see in local policies, at the beginning of the policy, it says purpose of the policy. There's not a purpose listed in EIC local. So my question is what's our purpose in having this policy?
What's the why?
What's the why? Janet asked that a couple meetings ago, what's our why in talking about this, but there's a how. The whole policy is how we do it, but there's not a why in that policy. And I think that's one of the things that we need to wrestle with just a little bit. Any other questions for Deanna?
Good job, Deanna.
Right.
Yeah, good job. I mean, it's,
I appreciate
Not
you
just-
all, I mean, this is not
not just tonight, I mean, this whole thing that you've
It's a
been
lot of
wrestling with is a monumental task, because it affects every student.
And I keep, one of the things I keep thinking is how long it's taken us to try to wrap our mind around this paradigm, and the public won't have had this at all. And so that's why we might need to step and incrementally.
And typically when, just as a reminder, typically when we make a sweeping change to this policy, it's usually done beginning with an incoming 9th grade class. And so you usually don't change the way things are calculated kind of midstream. I'm looking at you, Holly, and it's just, so that's something to think about as we still have time, I mean, because we're still talking about down the road.
That's interesting, there was a case out of Rock Springs ISD that our firm worked on this past year during COVID, where the board adopted a resolution during COVID to cut off GPA at the fall semester. and this young man who anticipated being valedictorian ended up being salutatorian, filed a grievance that went all the way up to the commissioner, and the commissioner said, you can change, your class rank, your GPA policy at any time, so there's the authority to do that, but it always kind of, you try to be fair. It's kind of a fundamental fairness issue to try to do it with the incoming class, so.
And we experienced that, and we know what that felt like.
Yeah, it always.
And it was hard, so I think there's a that difference of, we were all facing challenging COVID decisions and how to immediately impact kids and hold them harmless and which we too did, but intentionally changing it for the future, we wanna really think through, but you're right, yeah, thank you for that reminder. Okay,
We do.
thank you.
Thank you, Deanna.
I'm not gonna sleep tonight. It's just
I
gonna be-
never sleep
I'm
after
gonna be
these
playing this
meetings,
one.
ever.
Yeah.
Wait till 2 o'clock.
We got a lot to think about when you take student handbook and EIC and then board operating procedures all in one.
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
Any issues, concerns for future agendas? Anyone?
Oh, we're not done with this.
Yeah, no, we're not.
It'd be nice to put a bow on it, but some of these things, there's not a bow to be put on it, so.
I think we're getting closer to at least having some ideas.
I appreciate you all and the work in this, because I know that this is a new process for you to go deep dive into a policy like that, and I think it's worthwhile.
We are adjourned.